The gavel cracked against the bench, but no one in the courtroom moved. Michael felt every eye snap toward him as the prosecutor's words echoed, sharp and merciless. "Chief, are you prepared to testify against your own men?" The silence was heavy enough to crush bone. Behind him, someone whispered his name like a warning. And for the first time in his career, Michael wasn't sure whose side he was on. Before diving into this gripping tale, let us know where you're watching from the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch more inspiring stories like this one. He holds the thin envelope like a small, dangerous animal, warm from his hand, trembling just enough to make the paper crease. The rain has eaten the night into soft dark, and the fluorescent sign above the police station buzzes in a tired, electric hum. Light spills in a jaundiced rectangle across the wet pavement, and for a moment Michael Turner lets himself believe that the glow is steady, that nothing in the night will change its shape. The town smells of wet asphalt and frying oil from the diner 2 blocks over. A window fan turns in a second-floor apartment, pushing the sound of a television down the street like a faraway tide. In the air, there is the sharp bite of bleach and paper. Every station has that smell, a mix of cleaning and late-shift fatigue that sticks in the throat. Michael breathes it in and lets it settle. He has smelled this particular blend before in different cities, in smaller buildings and larger ones. He thinks of all the times he has scrubbed away the things he did not want to remember, and how that very act taught him how to look clean in the places that judge you by the shine of your shoes. Tonight, he is not here as a visitor or a petitioner or a man running from something. He is here because the envelope in his jacket says so. The letter, typed formal, stamped with the county seal, announced his appointment 2 days ago. Chief of Police. He read it 3 times on the bus ride home, then once more before falling asleep, and still the words felt like weather on his skin. Irrevocable, practical, impossible. Michael is 35. He grew up on afternoons that started with shotgun breakfasts and ended with doors that clicked shut long before 9. He learned early how to watch the faces in a room and learn which ones would look away. He walks up the steps slow, shoes slick on the concrete. His suit is dark, serviceable, not new. The jacket fits in a way that suggests repair twice over. He straightens his tie, though no one is watching. Because even in the little pockets of dignity you can choose, people will complicate the rest of you for having them. From inside, a radio chatter floats through the doorway, quick, clipped voices station speech, an argument about a tow, a dispatcher naming a street. Michael pauses with his hand on the door handle, and for the first time a different feeling presses under the anticipation. A concrete tickle of waiting that is close to fear. He thinks about the last time he felt like this, before a promotion at another job, before a move that carried his mother across state lines, before the high school principal told him the boys on the corner would never let him be anything else. He thinks about how his breath can sound loud when it counts the most. Inside the station, the light is a different kind of white, cold and clinical. The reception desk is staffed by an elderly officer bent over a crossword, glasses balanced on the tip of his nose. He looks up once and offers a nod that is more reflex than welcome. A wall clock ticks. It is almost midnight. The scent of coffee is stronger here, bitter and sweet, and promising a kind of company no one else is allowed to give. Michael steps forward. His voice feels smaller than the space demands. "Good evening." The officer squints. "Evening." The words are as neutral as the room, but the way the officer says them is an audible sorting, name, purpose, threat level. Michael puts the envelope on the counter like it is a passport. He watches the man's fingers thicken when they touch the paper. Fingers that have known this paper only in forms and warrants and the occasional notice to appear. "Are you here for report?" the officer asks. Michael's mouth shapes the truth and keeps it. Then he smiles briefly. "No, he gestures to the envelope. "I'm Michael Turner. I arrived on the appointment letter." For a second, the crossword man's face is a map of quick calculations. He looks at the letter, then back at Michael, then down at the computer screen as if the answer might be hidden there. Around the corner, a younger officer, dark-haired and busy, walks by carrying a paper cup. He glances at Michael, with a look that is precise and cold, like a measuring instrument. The older officer slides the letter into a drawer without reading it. "Are you sure you got the right station?" His voice is flat. He has the small cruelty of people who believe the world is the map they were given. Michael's pulse picks up. He senses the room leaning, ever so slightly, toward discomfort. He is used to that lean. He has spent a lifetime reading the small motions of the world as if they were a book of portents. He thinks of his mother's hands folding Sunday dresses, of the way she pressed her palms against his cheeks and told him to stand still when the children stared. He steadies himself against the counter. "I've got the right letter," he says. "I'm the new chief." The reception officer laughs, then, a short, surprised sound that tries to make everything small. The younger officer stops. "New chief?" he repeats, like a man testing a concoction and unsure whether to sip. Michael feels the change in the air as if it is a change in temperature. His simple statement, "Chief Michael Turner," landed differently than he expected. Some faces tighten. Others go already to folded assumptions. A black man in a suit at midnight in a police station must be, what? Lost? Mistaken? Dangerous? The room fills with a slow, heavy patience that says the story must be explained, and it will be explained according to rules written before Michael ever learned to read. A voice from the back, deep lazy, asks, "You from the city?" The man who owns it stands now in the doorway. Broad shoulders under a department jacket, hands large and usually quick on a radio. His name is Nathan Hale, and his smile has a habitual curve that does not reach his eyes. He approaches with a casualness that practices ownership in other people's spaces. Michael watches him come and measures him in the way that keeps memory of the past intact. Nathan's jaw tightens when he looks at Michael's face, as if simultaneously trying to remember where he has seen that face and inventing a different place. In the silence that follows Nathan's entrance, Michael feels a subtle tightening in his own chest, a memory of being pointed at through school windows. He forces his voice clear. "Yes, I'm with the county. I will take the oath tomorrow." Nathan's look is a slow specimen. He laughs once, low and clipped. "Oath tomorrow, huh? That's a hell of a letter to get at midnight." He pats the counter as if claiming its surface. The impartial observer in the narration slides in now, crisp and distant. Michael Turner is 35, appointed chief by a county board that recently replaced half the department's old guard. His record is clean. He holds 2 degrees. He volunteered in community outreach. He is, in formal terms, qualified. These facts sit in the room like smooth stones, waiting to be picked up and hurled or set aside. But the empathetic voice returns. Michael can feel the room like a wound. He notices the smell of Nathan's jacket, tobacco, and lemon-scented soap, and the way his fingertips drum on the counter, a tempo of impatience. Michael remembers when he last saw a man like Nathan, how the man laughed at a joke that made a friend of Michael's leave the bar humiliated. He remembers the small cruelty of being turned into an object lesson. Nathan reaches toward the envelope without asking. Michael keeps his fingers lightly on it. "Let me see that," Nathan says. "Michael, let's go." The paper slides toward Nathan, who reads the formal lines and then looks at the station's bulletin board as if proof is required there too. He squints, then lifts his head. For the first time since Michael stepped inside, there is a flicker of something like consideration. But it is fast and thin as a match strike. "Well," Nathan says, "I guess someone upstairs messed up." He folds the paper and slides it back. The old officer returns the letter to Michael with a motion that suggests the whole exchange is a trifle. The younger man crosses his arms, watching with the brazen curiosity of someone who enjoys watching a scene that does not yet have all the words it needs. Outside, the rain continues its soft interruption. The town's lights blur in the wet night like distant matches. Inside, the station's clock keeps its indifferent beat. Michael feels the room's attention pressing on him from all sides, cataloging, measuring, deciding whether he will be kept, turned away, tested. He is both stone and river in their eyes, firm in purpose, but flowing with the force of things that do not bend easily. He straightens his shoulders and tucks the envelope back into his breast pocket. If he has learned anything, it is this: to carry what you are given and to let its edges shape you only as you allow. He keeps his voice steady. I'll wait for whoever I need to speak with. Someone in the corner makes a small noise, half amused, half warning. The knight listens. The first act has begun, not with gunfire or accusation, but with a slow, intimate testing of boundaries, an ordinary human form of war where words and glances are traded like coins. Michael feels the law in his hands like a thing both heavy and fragile. He knows the next hours will show not only who he is to them, but who he will choose to be when the town's old stories come to meet the one he brings in his pocket. The radio in the corner spat out a thin, urgent voice. Unit 3, 14 to 50 on Elm. Possible disturbance. The words slid under the station's hum and lodged in Michael's chest like a small stone. He had been standing too still for too long, the way a man does when he folds himself around a new truth and tries to keep it from cracking. He stepped outside for air, the door closing soft behind him. Rain had stopped, leaving the street glossed and reflecting neon like a broken mirror. The night smelled of wet metal and the grease from the diner. Michael let the cold press against his jaw and pulled his collar up until only the line of his mouth showed. He dialed his mother on instinct, something familiar before anything official, and his thumb trembled over the screen. Her voice would be steady, small comforts spun into sentences, but he did not call. He listened instead to the town breathing. Distant traffic, a dog barking, two voices arguing under a street lamp. A patrol car rolled up with a muted hiss. Its lights were off, but the officer's movement inside was not casual. Through the windshield, Michael saw a figure in the back seat, hands behind a head that sat very still. A second car followed. Nathan and two other officers climbed out, faces pulled into that practical expression policemen wear when they have something they mean to finish. They walked with the ease of men who do not expect to be questioned tonight. Michael watched them bring a handcuffed man across the wet pavement and into the station. The man's shoulders were small and hunched against the cold. His jacket was sodden, the collar turned up, his brisk breath came like a metronome. He did not shout. He did not struggle. He moved as if he were being carried through a dream where resistance was not allowed. What's his name? Michael asked before he could catch himself, because there is a reflex in people who have come from somewhere else. You name what you see. Nathan glanced up. The look he gave Michael was the kind that examines a photograph for authenticity. Found him on Elm, he said. Hubbard street kids say he was asking for trouble. Tossed a bottle. Called it in. The man was placed at the chair against the far wall, the one with the scuffed seat and the metal legs. He folded his hands on his knees and kept his head bowed. Watching him up close, Michael noticed the cut at the corner of his eye, a dark nick that had dried into a thin map of brown. There was a calm to the man that did not belong to surrender. It belonged to someone who had been taught how to keep breathing when the world asked him to stop. The younger officer, James, moved like someone enjoying the certainty of his role. He pushed a button and a camera's red light blinked. Name, he said, routine pulling itself like a thread through the air. The man looked up then slowly. His eyes were dark and even the kind of honest look that reads rooms the same way a compass reads north. David Price, he said. The voice was low but steady. I don't want any trouble. No one said you did. James replied too quickly, the syllables clumsy. Bottle. Disturbance. Street-side complaint. Michael watched as Nathan's jaw worked. There was an old rhythm in his movements. First suspicion, then the quick tightening into blame. The room grew small in the echo of the officer's shifted stances. Michael felt suddenly raw, with something like recognition, as if the night had tilted and shown the seam where the fabric of this town was stitched together. David Price did not match whatever the officer's expectations had been. He did not flinch when they spoke hard words. He did not run. He kept his hands where they could be seen. There was no dramatic confession, no spike of violence, just the patient, human discomfort of someone placed in a position where dignity had to be held like a shield. Any ID? James asked. David slowly unzipped his jacket and revealed a folded scrap of paper, a worn photograph, and a library card. The photograph was of him with a child, hair shorter than, both smiling with a private joy that made Michael's throat tighten. The officers looked at these things like they were curiosities from a different era, relics that might complicate the neatness of a story they preferred. Michael stepped forward. "He looks like he belongs to this neighborhood," he said. His voice felt too loud in the small, fluorescent world. "We should at least call the supervisor, make sure." Nathan's smile came slow, like a gate opening on its own rusty hinges. "We called it in Turner. You ain't exactly the supervisor tonight, are you?" The name landed like a flat stone. Michael's body answered before his mind did. Old reflexes of being sized up, boxed in by a single word. He could feel, in the way Nathan's laugh sat sharp, the unspoken history. "You don't fit here." "I'm waiting to meet the board," Michael said. He kept his tone measured because the station kept a record of everything, and because he had learned that calm could sometimes be a kind of armor. He said he was asking for help. Nathan's hand moved to his belt, fingers brushing the radio. The room leaned closer, as if the air itself had begun listening for crack. "You asked for help?" Nathan echoed, and his eyes measured the man before him as if he might be made of the wrong kind of cloth. "You're sure about that?" David's face remained open. "Yes," he said. I needed a place to lie low. The alley behind the glass place. I thought maybe someone could help me sleep." The impartial observer notes now. Michael Turner stood between a man who had come in through the rain and a station that had for years been a vessel of certain rules. The patrol's quickness to translate presence into guilt was not abstract. It was the consequence of patterns, decades of judgment learned and taught within closed walls. This pattern had corners that were cut. Then, without ceremony, Nathan moved. He had a look like a judge ruling and a certainty like gravity. "We'll make a statement," he said. "If there's nothing, he'll be let go." His voice had the confident cruelty of people who believe procedure protects them from consequence. Michael watched the officers lead David to a holding cell. The man's shoulders did not collapse. The slow dignity remained. Michael's pulse steadied into a resolute beat. "I want to sit in on that statement," he said. The words were small but definite. Nathan's eyes narrowed. "You might not get the choice to," he said. Something in the station shifted. Maybe it was the fact of the handcuffs. Maybe it was the way the room's light seemed to sharpen into accusation. Or maybe it was Michael's presence, new, unrooted, that made the officers bristle. Whatever it was, the small stone lodged in Michael's chest rolled into something larger. He thought of his mother's hands again, the way she had taught him to hold himself when the world tried to flatten him. He thought about how often systems turn small acts of survival into evidence of guilt. When the door to the interview room swung open, Michael followed. He had no official claim. His claim was only that a man was being processed and someone should ensure it was done fairly. The room smelled of cheap disinfectant and old coffee, and the light above was a single bulb that made shadows of everything it touched. The officers arranged themselves like predators around a central object. Then, as if a single rope had been pulled, the evening unraveled. James, fixing a recorder, misread a movement, and Nathan, already wound thin with territorial certainty, took a step that snapped an old, ugly current into life. The younger officer's hand brushed Michael's sleeve in a way that meant he did not belong there, and before Michael could set his hand away, Nathan's voice cut through. "You gotta ID yourself," Nathan barked. "We don't take orders from strangers." Michael put his hand on his chest and felt for the envelope he had tucked there, the paper that carried the county's name. He reached slowly, consciously, as if to show there was no suddenness in him. But Nathan moved first. The older man's grip was abrupt and sure. He grabbed Michael's arm with a practiced force that had been used on people who were usually much smaller, people who might not stand straight under its weight. The room tightened. David watched from the glass with an unreadable expression. "Are you sure about this?" James muttered, the line between curiosity and alarm thin. Nathan's jaw tightened. "Pretty sure." He cuffed Michael before the facts could navigate the thickening air. The metal closed around his wrists with a hard, final click. The empathic voice strains now. The sting of metal on skin is not only physical, it carries the memory of every time a body was made into a suspicion. Michael felt something like flame in his palms, a memory of being treated like an example to be taught. He looked at Nathan with a steadiness that did not demand pity but wanted recognition. For a moment, the station's air held its breath. The small stone lodged in Michael's chest became a chasm. The inciting noise, the arrest of a man who had come in seeking help and the arrest of the man who had come to stand near him, unfolded not as spectacle, but as exposure. It revealed an old architecture of fear and ownership and the soft, dangerous places where a town's rules trusted certain faces and mistrusted others. Outside the interview room, the clock ticked. Someone switched the radio to a dull static. The lights buzzed. David Price sat very straight and watched the scene like a man who had already guessed at the ending. Michael, handcuffed with the future in his pocket, felt the story change its course under his feet. He had arrived to take charge, but the town had already begun to teach him what it wanted him to be. The cell's metal bench was cold against Michael's back, and the cuffs had a dull, constant weight on his wrists. He watched Nathan and James in the small interview room through the glass and felt an odd, quiet distance from them. Not just physical, but moral, as if a clear line had been drawn and he stood on the wrong side. The pain in his palms was small compared to the ache that had followed him since the county's letter, the pressure of expectation, the fear of being a symbol and not a leader. When they finally opened the door to take his statement, Nathan let Michael out of the cuffs with a casualness that tried to pretend the arrest had been nothing at all. He rubbed at the red mark on his own wrist as if it were the more important injury. James hovered nearby, attentive, as if waiting for permission to form an opinion. "Sit," Nathan said, and pushed a chair toward Michael. Michael sat, breathing slowly. He kept his hands folded on the table, so the impression of being dangerous would be harder to make. "You could have asked first," he said. Nathan smiled without warmth. "We asked. You ignored us." The lie was thin, but it carved a groove anyway. Michael saw in Nathan the hard facts of a man who would rather be right than just. He thought of how power lives in small gestures, a hand on a radio, the right joke at the right time, and how those gestures build reputations the way salt builds crust on a pan. Nathan had one already. Michael had to build his. James cleared his throat. "David Price." He said he was asking for help. Nathan shrugged. Maybe he was, but he was also causing a scene. "We get calls like that. We do our job." Michael felt something inside him bristle. "Our job is to protect people," he said, "to understand why they're there, not just to punish them." James looked between the two men. He had a face that seemed younger than his years, round at the eyes, thin at the mouth, and when he spoke his voice carried the strain of wanting to be liked. "Chief," he stopped, then corrected himself. "Michael, are you saying we handled it wrong?" Michael recognized that look in James, the look of a man who wanted to be on the right side, but feared stepping away from the crowd. "I'm saying we could be better," Michael answered. "We should listen before we lock someone up." Nathan let out a sound that might have been amusement. "And who says you get to teach us what is better?" The words were not only challenging, they were a demand to be proved wrong. Michael felt the room arrange itself into allies and bystanders. He thought of his mother, of how she had taught him to respond to anger with steadiness and not fire. He breathed and let the steadiness speak for him. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply, "because being chief means the community trusts us. We don't earn trust by treating them like suspects first." James fidgeted with a pen, caught between wanting to agree and wanting the comfort of a simple rule. Nathan, on the other hand, began to talk about the night in general terms: calls, complaints, safety. His speech was full of the small phrases that keep old systems alive: procedure, protocol, precedent. He spoke of lines that should not be crossed, of how chaos comes from leniency. Outside the thin pane of glass, David sat alone in the holding room. When James walked past later to get more forms, he paused and looked at David. The younger officer's expression shifted, if only for a moment, into something like pity. David met his eyes and offered a small, grateful nod. The exchange was brief, but it carried more meaning than the grand speeches in the interview room. It told a story of human recognition that had not yet been translated into policy or report. That night, after Michael left the station with his name still on his collar but his hands free, he walked beneath street lamps that pooled yellow light on the pavement. He thought about the way people place one another in boxes without asking for permission. He thought about his mother's pantry, how she kept things neat, put labels on jars, and always saved the best for visitors. He wanted to be a leader who would not label people before he knew them. He wanted to prove that an appointment letter meant more than a photograph on a bulletin board. Back at the station, Nathan sat at his desk and tapped at a file as if the motion could find the truth. He had a history in this town that ran like a river under the streets. His father had been a decorated officer. His brother-in-law ran a local towing company that often benefited from unpaid tickets. Nathan's world was made up of favors and debts, quiet understandings that were rarely written down. He had built his life on trust within that network, and change felt like a cold wind cutting across it. In Nathan's mind, the arrival of Michael Turner threatened the balance. Not because Michael was black, at least not only because, but because he represented an outside force that might unpick the tapestry Nathan had learned to trust. Nathan feared exposure. Not just of misconduct, but of the small compromises that made his life comfortable. He worried that reform meant losing the power to decide who belonged and who did not. James, meanwhile, did not sleep much that night. He replayed David Price's photo in his head, the man with a child, smiling, and the way Michael had spoken up for him. James had joined the force to be like his father, to earn a nod of approval at the diner, to be useful. But he had also seen moments at traffic stops and in interviews where men like David were laughed at or shrugged away. He did not want to be that kind of cop. Yet he also feared being ostracized by colleagues who teased softness. The division inside him pulled at his jaw like a thread. David Price had his own private gravity. He had grown up in a town, worked as a mechanic for years until layoff, and then injury made work scarce. The photograph in his jacket was of his son, Joshua, at 6 years old, one of the few constants that kept him moving forward. David had not wanted charity. He had wanted a place to sleep and a chance to stretch out without being kicked awake. He had hoped the police station, a symbol of order, might offer shelter rather than scorn. Instead, he had been criminalized for simply existing. As word of the midnight arrest spread, small ripples ran through the town. At the diner, where men in grease-stained aprons put the world back together one plate at a time, a few customers argued about law and order. On social media, posts appeared with pictures taken from a distance, captions that chose sides before the facts were all known. The story of a black man being arrested at the station where a black man had just been appointed as chief was a narrative ready to be shaped by opinion like clay. Michael watched from his apartment window as the town moved on the surface. He held his mother's words in his ear. Remember who you are, not who they say you are, and he felt both the courage and the weight of that advice. He had vowed to be different, to be better, but the night taught him that vows alone might not be enough. That evening crystallized into quiet decisions. Nathan decided he would watch Michael closely and not yield any ground to the new chief. He would gather allies among the old guard and remind them of the cost of changing. James decided he would try to act as a bridge, small gestures, a willingness to listen to Michael, a hope that he could be both respected and humane. David decided in his quiet way that he would fight to keep his dignity. He would seek help, not pity, and he would not let his existence become a cautionary tale. All of them, in their own ways, were maneuvering. Friends and enemies had not yet been named. Loyalties were tentative. The next moves would be small, careful, and charged with meaning. The patterns of a town, once set, were hard to undo. And yet a seed of something different had been planted that night, tiny, stubborn, alive. And it would take root or be trampled depending on choices that would come to feel like betrayals or acts of courage. Michael did not sleep much that week. The city's morning light felt like an interrogation lamp, bright and unfair, and every small sound in his apartment sounded like someone filing a complaint. A kettle hiss, a neighbor's radio, the slow tick of the wall clock. He kept replaying the station's night in his head. The way Nathan's laugh had bent the air, the way the cuffs had closed, it felt wrong in a way that made his teeth ache. The appointment letter sat in his desk drawer like a promise and a puzzle both. He went back to the station the next day under the pretense of paperwork. The county wanted signatures and inventories, he told himself. There were forms to fill and names to meet. But there was a different urgency under his steps. He wanted to see the footage from that night. He wanted to know how quickly everyone had decided what story they would tell. The front desk refused at first. You'll have to go through proper channels, the old officer said, non-committal and polite. Files and footage are on a request list. Michael smiled the way his mother had taught him for rainstorms, patient, steady. He waited. When the officer went to take a call, Michael slid sideways into the records room. The fluorescent light smelled of toner and old paper. Racks of case folders made the room feel like a library of small tragedies and bureaucratic victories. He found the camera system and sat before the monitor, his hands remembering buttons the way other men remembered prayers. The night's footage came up grainy and blue at first. He fast-forwarded to the time when Nathan had arrived with the patrol. The camera above the front door caught the patrol cars pulling up, the officers hauling someone across the wet pavement. Time on the screen clicked, indifferent. Michael watched David move, hunched hands behind, slow. The camera angle showed Nathan's swagger, the way he approached, a practice motion, the proud shoulders of someone used to being right. Then he rewound and watched again. The grain was resolved into detail. In the patrol car's reflection on the station's front window, a second vehicle could be seen pulling up and slowing behind the squad. The license plate flashed for a frame before the camera blurred it with light. Michael paused, zoomed, and the plate resolved into letters, starting with WAR, then the rest smeared. He jotted it down anyway. War? He walked the file room with the plate number rolling under his tongue like an unfamiliar name. There was a municipal registry on the public computer. War Ward. Elias Ward. The county commissioner. The name had weight. Ward chaired the board that had appointed Michael. Ward was the man who had signed the letter in ink that smelled faintly of law. Seeing his name in the reflection felt like the whisper of something deeper. Someone above had been in the same frame where a man had been pulled to his knees. Michael's chest tightened. He replayed the clip again and again until his eyes felt raw. At a point he had missed earlier, a figure slipped from the second vehicle and walked toward the alley behind the glass shop, then returned, watching from the shadows. At first it looked like a stranger, then the jacket stitching caught his eye, a pattern he had seen on a county car. The man in the shadow had not been a neutral passerby. He had been waiting. He printed a still, tucked it into his jacket, and left the records room as if nothing had happened. He went into Nathan's office with the casualness of someone who has power because he can act like it. Nathan was at his desk, turning a mug in his hand. "You took my badge?" Nathan said before Michael sat, the sentence an accusation disguised as a question. Michael put the still on the desk. Nathan's eyes flicked to the paper, then away, as if it taught him something he did not want to know. "You shouldn't be poking," Nathan said. Michael let a soft silence fall. "Who was in that car?" he asked. Nathan's hands tightened. "Why do you care?" he said. Because the station had its story, a neat one, practiced and ready, and Michael was beginning to see the loose threads. He thought of David in the chair, the photograph of a boy in his wallet. He thought of the way Nathan had moved and how quickly the room had closed around him. "No one should be hiding in the shadows of our calls," Michael said. "If someone came here to watch how we handle our own, I want to know why." Nathan's face hardened. Anger, a mask for something more private. "You're new," he said. "You don't know how things work." Michael had been trying to be that new kind of leader, patient and precise. But his patience had limits that nights like this kept erasing. "I want the dispatch logs," he said. "All radio traffic for the Elm call, plus the squad car GPS data." Nathan's jaw clicked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He was a man who kept files in hearts and safe boxes, who knew which drawer to leave open and which to lock. He should have refused. Instead, he left the room and made a show of calling the dispatcher down. When the logs came, they were ordinary at first, times, tones, unit numbers. But then Michael saw a line that did not belong, a private transmission from a unit labeled War 3 at 2347, a terse message instructing a tow company to be on standby near Elm. War 3 was not a patrol unit. War 3 belonged to Ward's personal vehicle, his county liaison. The dispatcher's note said the call was at the request of a county official. The time matched the patrol's arrival. Michael's mouth went dry. He pushed further. He called the county office under the guise of routine protocol and reached a voicemail. He left a message with the kind of politeness that masks steel. Ward did not return the call. That night, James found him on the station steps. The younger officer's face was thinner, eyes lined with trouble. He had a box of paperwork under his arm and a cautiousness in his step. "You shouldn't have looked at that," James said softly. Michael folded his hands around the papers still warm from the copier. Why would the commissioner's liaison be near the scene? James hesitated, like someone picking a splinter from a friend's palm. "Ward's been involved in things," he said. "He and some board members have been trying to keep certain problems out of the press. They like neat endings." "You mean cover-ups," Michael said. James's nod was so small Michael could have missed it. They wanted someone who looks like they're fixing things, someone to take the fall if it goes bad. Someone, he stopped, the words dropping like stones. Someone expendable. The twist landed like cold rain. Michael realized his appointment letter was not just a promotion. It was a placement. He had been made chief in a season when the county needed an image, an outsider with credentials, someone who could be held up as proof of change while old systems continued in the dark. The commissioner's liaison at the scene, the staged arrest, the quickness to cuff Michael, these were not accidents. They were threads of a plan. Betrayal came with a human face. Nathan's small, personal cruelty unrolled into something larger and organized. The night at the station was not just local prejudice. It had been arranged, overseen, given cover by people with power who knew how to make their decisions invisible. The town's architecture of trust had been shaped by hands that thought themselves unaccountable. Michael felt the letter in his drawer suddenly heavier. Whoever had signed it had known more than they said. The role he had been asked to play, chief, was now a stage. His choices would no longer be private. They would be measured against a script he had not written. James's hand on his shoulder was quick and shaky. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know how deep it was." Michael thought of David's quiet face, of Joshua in that photograph, of his mother telling him to hold himself steady in storms. He closed his eyes for a second and let the city's distant hum fill him. The betrayal was not only Nathan's. It had a name he had seen on paper, folded into his career like a hidden clause, Elias Ward. He was angry, yes, but underneath anger sat a chipped, clearer thing, resolve. The twist had tilted the map. The path forward was no longer simply to train a department or earn trust. It was to find truth in rooms designed to keep it out, to confront a system that used faces as props and men as proof. He slid the still photograph into his pocket and stepped back into the street where the town kept turning, unaware of the hands that shaped its story in quiet rooms. The week after Michael found the county liaison on the camera, the town seemed smaller and louder at once. Every corner felt like a waiting room. Rumors moved through the streets faster than people did. Whispers folded into each other and became shapes that threatened to make their own facts. Michael woke with the city already pressing its questions into his sleep. He called his mother first on mornings when the weight was heavy. Her voice was steady and plain and full of the small certainties that time cannot take away. "Keep your head," she said. "They'll try to pull you into their storms. Don't let them take your hands." He repeated that to himself like a prayer. He walked into the station wearing a suit that suddenly felt less like armor and more like a sign. Nathan watched him from across the floor and put a deliberate space between himself and the new chief. It was a look that meant the ground had shifted and allegiances were being tested. Michael's first choice was public, call for an internal review of the Elm arrest. It was the obvious thing for a new chief who wanted to prove fairness and show leadership. But Obvious did not mean safe. He stood at the podium in the briefing room, the fluorescent lights making small halos on the worn table. Officers sat in rigid rows. Some faces were polite, others cold. Nathan's eyes were flat and sharp. "I want the department to review what happened at Elm," Michael said. His voice did not shake. The room hummed like a trapped thing. "You're asking us to investigate our own," Nathan said in a tone that was equal parts scorn and warning. "You don't know the pressure we're under. You don't know the calls we get." "I know enough to know we can do better," Michael answered. "We start by looking at the footage and the logs. We listen to witnesses. Fairness is not weakness." James watched the room for a long time. He had always wanted to be the kind of cop who helped people, and he had always feared the cost. Now the cost had a face he had never expected to meet, the anger of men whose world would be rearranged if they had to change. He shifted in his seat, and when Michael finished, he stood. "I'll help with the review," James said quietly. "I want to learn. I want to do the right thing." The ripple in the room was immediate. A few officers exchanged looks that were not friendly. Someone muttered under his breath. Nathan's jaw tightened. The muscles moved like a lock snapping closed. That afternoon, Michael met with David in a small conference room. David's hands were steady as he handed over the details of his night. How he'd roofed over himself in the alley to rest, how a teenager had shouted at him, how a passing car door had slammed and someone had called it in. He spoke without flourish, with a tired clarity that made Michael want to shoulder more of the world. "You don't want trouble," Michael said when David finished. "You want help." David's eyes were honest. "I need a job. I need somewhere to be. I don't want my boy to think his dad disappeared." Michael felt a sharp ache at the name Joshua. He thought of the photograph that had been folded in David's jacket. "I'll do what I can," he said. "I can try to connect you with people." David asked, half-smile. "Sometimes the people with the right pads of paper only hand out forms. They don't give hands." Michael heard the truth in that and felt the helplessness bloom in his chest. He had power on paper, but paper was a thin thing when people's lives were at stake. He promised cautiously and meant it, then left with the sense that promises would have to be backed by action soon. That night, the first external pressure arrived, not as a threat, but as a formal letter. Elias Ward sent a polite, paper-thin note praising the county's quick response and urging the department to maintain public confidence. It was a letter cloaked in civility that tasted of pressure. Michael read it twice and then folded it into his pocket. Ward's voice on paper felt like a hand resting on the back of his neck, gentle but present. Then came a call from the local paper. A reporter wanted to comment on a rumor that a county vehicle had been seen near Elm the night of the arrest. Michael kept his reply neat and careful. "We're reviewing internal footage," he told her. "We can't comment further." Outside the optics, the pressure became physical. A tow truck that worked with Nathan's brother-in-law started detaining cars of complainants whose stories might have favored a different narrative. Nathan and his allies began late-night ride-alongs, showing men in uniform their power to keep watch. Subtle sabotage crept into Michael's life. His office phone line clicked and stuttered during important calls, paperwork went missing for a crucial meeting, and a file on community outreach vanished from the shared drive the day he planned a town hall. Each small act felt like a test. Sometimes the tests were obvious. Nathan's raised voice in a staff meeting produced immediate compliance from some officers. Other times they were invisible, like a slow leak in a dam. Michael learned to notice patterns, to read the way people moved around him. He began to keep copies of everything he touched and to let trusted allies know where he would be. The quiet work of protection took more of his time than he expected. Internally, his choices gnawed. He could confront Ward directly, and there were merits to exposing the commissioner's involvement. But the county had power, funding, promotions, and influence that could destroy the department or rewrite the facts of any story. To move too quickly would risk the job he needed to change things. To move too slowly would risk the lives of people like David. The moral bind tightened around him like a loop. James became the fulcrum. He brought small pieces of information, a dispatch log he'd saved on his phone, a receipt that placed Ward's liaison near Elm at the time of the arrest. Each snippet was a whisper that fed Michael's resolve. James grew more nervous with each passing day, and Michael could see the strain in the younger officer's eyes. The same strain that flashes when a man must decide between career and conscience. One night, Michael sat alone at his kitchen table and held the still he had printed from the records room. The photo was a frozen truth, the county liaison standing in shadow, watching. Michael traced the letters with his thumb as if he could make them say what he needed. He remembered his mother's hands, steady and worn. He remembered David's voice, calm and tired. He had to choose. He chose to act in small, public ways that could not be easily erased. He set up a free job fair with local businesses and announced a partnership with a community center that offered apprenticeships. He asked for volunteers to join a community oversight committee for the police. Each step was measured and deliberate, designed to keep answers in the light rather than hidden. It also provoked Nathan. "You're playing a dangerous game," Nathan told him in the parking lot one night. They stood under a sodium lamp that turned the world yellow and flat. "I'm trying to get people help," Michael said. "Help for whom?" "For the ones who don't know their place." Nathan's words were cold as glass. Michael felt the old memory of being told his place, but he also felt something new, a clearer sense of what his name meant in the town's ledger. He would have to be patient and fierce at once. He would have to protect himself and the people who trusted him. The stakes felt enormous. A man's job, a community's trust, a boy's future. As the days passed, the town's pulse quickened. Meetings multiplied. Rumors solidified into narratives. Nathan's circle watched Michael's moves with the careful vigilance of men who had long ruled small empires. Ward tightened his correspondence into polite reminders. James flickered between courage and fear, sometimes not answering his phone. Michael slept less. He ate less. He kept moving like a man trying to outrun smoke. Each choice he made pulled the story tighter, and he felt the rope at his feet. The next act would demand more than words. It would demand proof, confrontation, and maybe a betrayal that would have to be answered with something the town had not expected, a kind of truth that could not be bought or bowed. The night the truth came out, the town felt like it had been waiting for a long time, held its breath under a low, pregnant sky. Rain threatened but did not fall. The square outside the old courthouse was full of folding chairs and a rented stage, strings of bulbs casting a warm, fragile light over faces that had been talking in whispers for weeks. Michael stood at the back of the crowd longer than he planned, feeling the weight of his name and the weight of everyone else's hopes pressing into his shoulders. Inside the courthouse, the oversight meeting had started as a routine forum. Instead, it had become a place where small papers and hidden recordings would be turned into a kind of light. Michael had arranged it carefully, a live stream, recorded statements, and most important, a projector borrowed from the community center. He had asked David to come, and Joshua had been brought along by a neighbor, eyes wide, clutching a small toy. Michael watched them sit near the front, David's jaw set, and Joshua's small foot tapping with nervous energy. He felt a fierce protectiveness that made his palms sweat. Nathan arrived late, the lines around his mouth carved deeper in the stage light. He sat with officers clustered like a small island. Elias Ward came with a polite smile, the kind that could be folded into a press release. Both men thought they had measured the night and bent it to their favor. They had not expected the way light can find the smallest crack. James stood at Michael's side. He looked like a man fighting with shadows, pale face drawn, and when Michael caught his eye, James nodded once, the way a man passes a baton. Michael knew that James had risked a lot to get him what he had: a second angle from a patrol car, a copy dispatch log, and the sharpest blade, an audio file James had recorded on his phone during a late-night call with Nathan. James had told Michael he couldn't do much more. He had stayed, though, to make sure the truth would not be swallowed. The meeting started, voices polite and careful. Then Michael asked for silence and stepped up to the microphone. He did not speak for long. He said only what the town needed to hear, that he had found evidence suggesting county involvement at the Elm incident, and that he would show what he had. His hands did not tremble. His voice did not falter. The screen came alive with grainy footage first, the patrol cars, the reflection of a second vehicle, a shadow near the alley. The room watched the slow, ordinary cruelty unfold. David led in, cuffed, the officers moving as if rehearsed. The camera angle showed the liaison's car pulling away. Faces in the crowd shifted. Some went pale, some hardened. Then Michael played the dispatch log, time-stamped and clear. The line naming war, 3, and the request for a tow blinked across the screen. Elias Ward's name had been on Michael's desk in ink once. Now it was on display as a part of a sequence that could not be explained away by accident. Nathan's jaw tightened like a fist. He rose, but the room closed around him with the sound of held breath. He tried to speak. His voice was a stone in his throat. "This is circumstantial," he said. "You can't." Michael cut him off gently. "There's more," he said. "There's audio." He turned the projector to a waveform pulled from James's file. The room listened as a low, recorded voice, Nathan's unmistakable, could be heard calling for a certain kind of reaction that night. The recording was clipped, but clear, an instruction, a tone of voice that left no room for mistake. Nathan's face moved through shades of color as if light itself were finding the truth beneath his practiced skin. He swallowed, tried to craft a denial, but the audio looped again and again until every lie had no place to hide. Some in the audience shifted in their seats, others wept in silence. The buzz of phone cameras stuttered and grew as people captured the moment. Elias Ward stood with a calm that was both practiced and faltering. He had expected deniability, paper trails that could be smooth. He had not planned for a patrol car camera or a young officer with a conscience and a phone. The mayor, seated near the dais, looked at Ward, then at the screen. The political scaffolding that had propped up neat narratives began to creak. Outside, someone started whispering that the board would be meeting in an emergency session. Inside, the room sensed that the town had moved from rumor into evidence. Michael felt a voice at the back calling for action, not violence, but a demand for accountability. He thought of Joshua's small hand, the way it gripped a plastic dinosaur, and the thought gave him a sharp, clean clarity. Truth needed witnesses, and witnesses needed protection. Nathan made a move toward the microphone, his lips tight. "This is entrapment," he said. "That recording was taken without consent. You're breaking procedures." James stepped forward then, and for a heartbeat, the whole room turned. He spoke, his voice rough but steady. He told the small, quiet truth of doing what was right. He explained how he had recorded Nathan by accident, leaving the recorder on after a routine debrief. His confession was simple and heavy. He'd saved the file, and he'd given it to Michael because he couldn't stand the weight of what he'd seen. James did not try to explain cowardice or courage. He simply said he had chosen the latter. Nathan's face broke then in a way that made the room lean in as if watching a small animal caught in a trap. He started to speak, to defend, to shift blame, but the community members were already standing. Voices rose, not with rage, but with a resolute demand. An external investigation now, legal action and protection for witnesses. David stood too, Joshua by his side, and he spoke in a voice that surprised both himself and others. He did not scream or beg. He told the story plainly. How it felt to be picked up for needing sleep, how it felt to be treated like a nuisance. He spoke of his son and of the small dignity he tried to keep. The prosecutor's office had been watching. A deputy had been seated in the corner since the meeting began. Now she rose, face tight, with officialness, and said the words that made the room both lighter and colder. The evidence would be reviewed, warrants would be considered. Elias Ward was asked to step outside for a private conversation with the deputy, then escorted out. Nathan was placed on administrative leave while the department and an outside attorney reviewed the tape and the recording. It was not the same as justice, not yet. It was a moving of the pieces, a first necessary unseating. But for the people in the room, for David, for Joshua, for Michael, it felt like the beginning of a reckoning. The crowd dispersed into a night that now glimmered with possibility rather than dread. Some clapped softly. Others stood with hands on hearts. Michael walked out into the cool air and found James waiting on the courthouse steps. They did not speak at first. The town seemed to exhale. Then James offered his hand, simple and human. Michael took it and held on. The future still has its shadows. Old systems do not fall with a single night's work. But a door had been opened, and the light had been allowed to enter. As they left, Michael watched David and Joshua walking together, small figures under the bulbs. He thought of the betrayals that had been exposed, of the way power had tried to bend truth into a neat story. He thought of the people who had risked something, James, who had walked the thin line between safety and conscience, David, who had shown up despite fear, and the neighbors who had come to witness. The climax had not been a single blow, but a careful unmasking. The town could still recoil, deny, or rebuild. For now, in that warm afterglow of bulbs and voices, truth had been named aloud. The consequences would come. The hardest part, change, would start with small, stubborn acts, hearings, oversight, policy reforms, and above all, people learning to listen to one another again. The night closed like a door behind them, and the sound that filled the space was not silence, but the slow, steady murmur of a town beginning to reckon. The weeks after the courthouse night felt like a slow turning of weather. The first storm had broken the surface, but the ground still needed time to settle. Investigations moved through offices and through pages of paper. The prosecutor asked questions, and the county called meetings. Elias Ward resigned from his liaison duties and was referred to an ethics committee. His name stayed in headlines for a while, then settled into conversations at kitchen tables. Nathan was placed on administrative leave, and the department began an internal audit that reached into corners some had assumed were sealed forever. These were not clean endings. There were no triumphant banners or sudden, miraculous fixes. Instead, there were small, concrete shifts, policies rewritten, cameras repositioned, new guidelines about how calls were handled and how officers logged what they did. The town created a civilian oversight committee, not because the department suddenly loved transparency, but because enough people demanded it. Michael sat on that new committee as chief, but he sat differently than he had a month before. Quieter in public, more careful in private. David's life changed in small, steady ways. A local mechanic shop offered him part-time work repairing tires and oil pans. It was not a grand job, but it paid, and it let him be part of a routine he had missed since his layoff. The community center partnered with the shop to host skill classes for young fathers. Joshua watched his father come home with grease on his hands and a tired, honest smile, and the way the boy's pride bloomed was a kind of proof that mattered more than any policy memo. James faced his own crossroads. He had been suspended during the official review while the tapes and records were examined. People on social media argued about him, hero or traitor, until reality, as it often does, proved more complicated. The department could have punished him more harshly for breaking protocol when he recorded Nathan, but the public pressure and the clear moral weight of his act complicated the calculus. He was reprimanded, yes, and he lost a promotion that had been promised years ago, but he kept his badge. More than that, in the weeks that followed, young officers began to ask him questions about what it meant to choose conscience over comfort. He became, unwillingly at first, a quiet example. Nathan's removal from active duty was painful for him. He fought the decisions in meetings and through lawyers. He had friends who defended him and others who turned away. In quieter moments, he visited the bridge by the river and watched the water carving its way around stone, a small and steady reminder that the world did not stop because one man lost his place. There were conversations he would have to face about choices he had made, about the favors he had taken that looked like normal business until they did not. His pride had been a steady currency. Losing it forced him into a reckoning he had avoided. For Michael, the cost was more complex. The county's appointment had been both a gift and a trap. He had chosen to use the position to shine light, and that choice changed his relationships. Some people admired him, others resented him, allies shifted and new ones formed. He learned the hard economy of change, how each decision trades comfort for consequence, and how the ledger does not always balance neatly. There were nights when he still woke with the memory of cuffs leaving a red circle on his wrists and the sting of being judged before proof. He would call his mother and hear her simple voice steady him, "Keep your hands clean and your heart honest," she would say. He realized that honesty did not mean naive goodness. It meant doing things that hurt in the short run to heal slowly in the long run. It meant protecting the little people and also knowing when to press on the powerful. One afternoon, Michael visited the alley where David had slept. It looked ordinary in daylight, a narrow slice of brick and faded graffiti, a place the town stepped around when it wanted to ignore problems. He knelt by the curb and picked up a small coin stuck in a crack, rubbed it clean, and put it in his pocket. It was a tiny symbolic act, meaningless to anyone but him, but it felt like a promise to gather what the town had dropped and try to return it. At a public forum, Michael said words that were both apology and promise. He spoke of mistakes made by officers, by leaders, and by the systems that allowed shortcuts to become habits. He did not pretend it was only men like Nathan who were to blame. He talked about fear as a teacher that often teaches the wrong lessons, about how good men can let their loyalty to each other outshine their loyalty to truth. He asked the town to forgive where it could, to push where it must, and to hold one another accountable without turning every slip into a cliff. People listened. Some left angry. Others came forward with stories they had kept folded for years. The Oversight Committee proposed training a citizen review board with rotating members and a new requirement that officers wear body cameras in public interactions. These changes were small and bureaucratic, but they were steps that would be measured over months and years. In private, Michael wrestled with his own part in the drama. He had entered a role given by men who thought an image could substitute for real work. He had used the position to expose them. He had also, in those early days, considered compromises, quiet agreements that might have kept the department running smoothly while hiding the dirt. He had said no to such deals, and his refusal cost him allies. But the cost also bought something, a clearer sense of who he was when no one watched. That clarity did not bring comfort so much as responsibility. He thought often of David and Joshua and the many faces he would never know. He thought of James and Nathan, of how thin the line is between courage and cowardice. He understood that institutions did not change because one man corrected them. They changed when enough men and women acted differently, when rules were rewritten and habits retrained. Months later, standing by the community center as a class of young apprentices filed past, Michael felt a tired kind of hope. The town still held its old stories and its old grudges, but it had begun to make new ones, of small fairnesses, of visible records, of voices at meetings that were not always the same ones that had filled rooms before. He had not solved everything. He would never be the kind of man to claim to have, but he had moved a few stones, loosened a few bricks, and set in motion people who would watch the work continue. As night fell, he walked home beneath the same sodium lamps that had once made faces look harder. He stopped and listened to the sounds of his town, the distant murmur of a radio, a child laughing behind a screen door, the steady rustle of leaves. He felt the weight of the chief's badge like a thing that could break or hold. He had chosen to hold it so that others might rest lighter. That, he thought, was a kind of grace, not a solution, but a promise to keep trying. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.